Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm grateful that you've joined us for this episode because today we're going to be talking about healing from abuse and trauma and walking in the fullness of who God created you to be. Today, I want to start off with Psalm 23:3. It's a simple but power-packed verse, and it says, "He restores my soul." And that, my friends, is a promise. It's a promise to you. It's a promise to my guest and I want us to take hold of that today. Whatever it is you have gone through, whatever it is you might be experiencing now, know that you are going through it, and He will restore your soul. Today's guest is my friend, Kristin Clouse, who's a speaker, a licensed professional counselor, pastor, published author, podcaster, life trauma, and spiritual coach. She's an abuse survivor who helps hurting individuals find freedom, healing, and restoration from trauma, abuse, and life difficulties by helping them recognize their soul wounds so they can grow closer in their relationship with Jesus. She's the author of Healing for Our Soul Gardens, Restoration and Wholeness After Sexual Abuse. And she's a contributing author to the She Writes for Him Stories of Resilient Faith. Welcome to the program, Kristin.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle. It is wonderful to be here with you.
I'm so excited to have a fellow mental health professional.
Yeah.
There's so much we could talk about, but today we're going to be talking about healing from abuse and trauma. Now, I've interviewed hundreds of guests on this program, and what I have found is the consistent thread is that so often our own passion comes out of our hurts and trials and experiences. And even if not our passion, our ministry comes out of what we've been through. So where did your ministry to others from healing from abuse and trauma come from?
Well, really, Dr. Michelle, it came from my own life experiences, as when I became a Christian and I asked Jesus into my life at 21 years old, I had lived a pretty difficult life. There was some things. I was raised by a single parent. I was sexually abused for 2 years by some neighbor kids. And then when I was 14, I went out with some friends, and that night turned into my worst nightmare when I was held against my will and repeatedly raped and abused throughout the night. I was able to escape the next morning, and I just plummeted from there. I'm going to be honest. My life just spiraled out of control. I plunged into drugs and alcohol. So when I found Jesus at 21, he began to transform my life. He began to heal and restore me. And through that journey, it became a passion that God used what the enemy meant to destroy me for your good. And I have a heart and passion and an understanding of what those that have experienced abuse, why they do some of the things they do. Somebody would look at me as a 14-year-old, say, she's just gone off the deep end and she's into drugs and alcohol, but I know the real reasons behind it. And so that just has become my life passion of helping women walk through this journey of healing and to find hope, that there is hope on the other side from abuse.
I think that that's so appropriate and so wise that you've recognized that what the enemy intended to harm, and he was the one who is behind your abuse and your trauma, what he intended to harm, God has turned to use for good.
Yeah.
So often the guests that I interview on here, as well as my own story, is that this is not the ministry we would have chosen for ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I'm grateful because the consistent thread is that if we will surrender our hurts and our experiences to him, he will use them for good.
Absolutely.
We might not want to go back and endure that ever again,
mm-hmm.
but we can see that there's purpose in the pain. What effect did sexual abuse have on you? I know that this is something that so many experience, but for those who haven't experienced it, it can be hard to understand the impact of that.
Yeah. Sexual abuse, all abuse is difficult. You know, we both know that all abuse is difficult. However, sexual abuse really digs into our soul, into who we are. It gets into our identity and into our core belief system. And it really destroys and deteriorates that. And so we get these soul wounds. And I work with individuals with all types of abuse about soul wounds, but there's something specific about sexual abuse. There comes a shame. There's a difficulty to trust, to have intimacy. There's so much that is deep within us that takes place. And so walking an individual through that healing process so that they can see that their life is restorable, that regardless of what they have experienced, and that's not belittling what they've experienced in no way, shape, or form, but that does not define them. And what happens with sexual abuse is it becomes our defining, it defines our character, our value, and our self-worth. And so helping individuals with that deep soul wounds, which our soul wounds are our mind, will, and our emotion. They're wounded by the abuse that we experience. And so helping women find that healing, find hope again, learn to trust God, to trust other people, to have relationships, and that they are good. When God created us, each of us, when he put everything about us, like Michelle, he put our strengths, our weaknesses, our personality, everything about us, he put it together and he said, she is good. And to help women find and hear that again, that to God, they are good. They are not dirty. They are not broken. They are not bad, but they were created in God's image, and getting people back on track and back into the fullness of who God created them to be, not what their past abuse tells them their value is.
But let's be clear. I know that you experienced that sexual abuse and you speak and work largely with women, but males can also experience sexual abuse. And sometimes their behavior after having been a victim of sexual abuse may be different than what we see in females, but it's no less significant.
Absolutely. Yes. I just happen to work more with the population of women.
Right.
I have worked with men with abuse, but I tend to work more with the women population.
You have a book called Healing for Your Soul Gardens. And I have to admit that term soul gardens is not one that I had heard before. So let's talk a little bit about what exactly is that?
So I touched a little bit on that our soul is our mind, will, and our emotions. And I am a very picture person. That's the way God talks to me. I see images and pictures. And so if you just imagine a beautiful garden, I love English gardens, and it has beautiful pathways and little dainty flowers and tall flowers and arbors and the borders, the stone borders around it. And there's a beautiful fountain that's just filled with living life. And that is us. That is actually our soul. And what happens is one day a vandal comes in and destroys it and takes everything of value out of it. And it is a wreck. And that is what happens to our soul when abuse comes in. And whether that's sexual, whether that is physical, emotional, that's what happens is our soul gets damaged. And often what happens is we lock up the garden of our heart. Yeah. And we lock everything up. We don't let anybody in. And we close a part of ourselves off. And so those soul wounds are those things that we have locked up inside of us, but they're affecting our relationships. They're affecting whether we have anxiety, depression. There's so many things, eating disorders. We could go on and on about all the things that are the after effects of abuse in somebody's life. But the core issue is that soul wound. And one of the core issues in that soul wound is our love relationship with God, because we don't just close our soul to one another.
Right.
We close it to God. And so our soul, which is, if you look at a lamp, and the lamp is, has a cord, and then there's the plug part, and then of course the body. Well, the cord is our soul, the plug is our spirit, and the body of the lamp is our body. So if we get a kink in our soul, then we're not having the light of Jesus coming in and out of us. It's not an issue of whether we're saved or not. It's an issue of whether we're thriving in the life that God intended us to, if we're living in health and wholeness. And so getting to those issues in that cord so that we have a full connection, so that the light of Jesus is shining out of us, so that we are healthy and thriving in our life. Those are the issues that we want to walk individuals through.
Such important material that we're talking about today. And it's a heavy topic. So friends, we're going to stop for just a minute and take a real brief commercial break, give you a chance to breathe for a second. But I want you to stick with us, because when we come back, we're going to be talking with Kristin more about healing from abuse and trauma and walking in the fullness of who God created you to be. We've got good stuff after this break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where today we are talking with licensed professional counselor Kristin Clouse, and we are talking about healing from abuse and trauma and how to live in the fullness of who God created you to be. Kristin, share with us a little bit about the statistics about the prevalence of abuse.
Yeah, the statistics report that 1 out of 3 to 4 women, really the statistics have changed a lot. Some say up to 5. I average it off at 4, that 1 in 4 women have been sexually abused sometime in their lifetime. So you have 20 women in a room. And statistics say that 1 in 4 of those women have experienced sexual abuse. And it's more prevalent than we're aware of.
Yeah.
And so many suffer in silence. They suffer with that shame and that brokenness of what they have experienced. And so we need to bring it to the light. We need to bring this issue to the light. And how can we, as counselors, but we as the church, how can we be a place of healing and wholeness for women? And that's really what I want to see, not just me individually working with women. That's why I wrote the book that I did, because it's in a workbook form. It's so that we can walk women through that healing. Because in all honesty, women go to counseling, but they also go into support groups, and they can find healing through support groups as well as through counseling.
Will you talk for just a minute about how the abuse of our past ends up showing up in our current life issues and challenges? You mentioned earlier that we have a tendency to want to, shove it down and lock it away. Mm-hmm. And so I think some people may not even be aware of how their past abuse is currently affecting their life and their relationships. What do you see with those that you counsel?
Yeah, often individuals come into my office for depression, anxiety, eating disorders, difficulty, hurts, hard relationships, conflicts, anger, those type of issues in their life. But with every individual that comes into my office, I always do a PTSD assessment. I do a trauma assessment. I ask the questions.
Yeah.
And a lot of counselors and therapists don't ask those questions. They kind of graze over it. Many do, but a lot don't. And they focus just on the depression and the anxiety and the difficult relationships, the anger issues. But when we go and we find what the core issue is, and we do that assessment, then we find that a large portion of those individuals have a trauma history. So what's happening is our trauma from our past is still affecting us because we haven't dealt with it. So once we begin to help them process through it, work through it, get some good coping skills, recognize their triggers, and allow that healing balm of Gilead from God to come in and minister to their hearts and talk about those things that they haven't talked about, bring it to the light, then there is a healing that begins to take place in them.
And that, to watch that is so incredible. It's almost like all of a sudden the light bulb comes on and you can see the light in their eyes again.
Yeah.
Now, with your background in counseling and as a women's ministry leader, you have a very well-rounded approach to helping women move from brokenness to healing. What are some healthy ways to address a negative thought process and shame-led thoughts? Because shame is such a gorilla on the back of those who have been through abuse and those who struggle with mental health issues, whether there's a history of abuse or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shame is, yes, shame. In fact, I was just speaking on shame this weekend at a conference. Shame gets into, as I mentioned earlier, about our core belief systems. So shame is like a vine, and it gets into the foundation of our value, and it begins to deteriorate our value. Much like a vine can wrap around a tree and choke the life out of it. That's what shame does to us. And so, for one, bring shame to the light, bring our story to the light. You know, when Jesus ministered to the woman at the well, he brought her story to the light, but he didn't belittle her. He didn't shame her. He didn't put her down. He did it with love and kindness, but he brought it to the light. And out of that, her story was transformed. Her life was transformed. And she actually was used to change her community. And Jesus stayed there for 2 days, and there was a whole little revival that took place, that lives were changed, many were changed. And so that's the power of when we bring it to the light and don't let it be hidden and control our lives in the way that shame can. That's just one of the ways of breaking that power of shame in our life.
But I want to be clear here. Kristin and I are not suggesting that you should share your past experiences and abuse and trauma with just anyone.
No.
We're suggesting you find a safe place, like with a counselor or a pastoral leader, ministry leader, someone who's safe.
Yeah. Because that's part of, you know, when I talked about earlier about the image of the garden, and when the boundaries are taken down, what happens is we don't have good boundaries.
Yeah.
I'm the first to say that in my younger years, before I was really healed and transformed from abuse, I didn't have good boundaries. And so what was outside comes in, what's in goes out, and you don't have good relationship and boundaries. And so you either overshare, and then it overwhelms your friends and family because you're oversharing and they don't have the capacity, the ability to help you process through it, or you undershare. So we need to find, as you mentioned, those healthy people to help us process through.
Absolutely. Now, I've heard you make the following statement. I made a choice to fight for my life. I was not created to live as a victim, overflowing with pain and too damaged to do any good in this world. Now, that is a powerful statement. And I believe that one of the most powerful weapons is choice. But I know that sometimes people feel powerless to make a choice. So what would you say to someone right now who feels broken beyond repair and maybe feels that they don't have the strength or the courage to fight like you did?
Well, first, I would say nothing or no one is beyond restoration with our Jesus.
Yes.
I say that over and over because if God can restore me, then I know he can restore anyone. And I know what a mess and destructive path that my life was on. And we are all equal in God's eyes. So if God can heal me, he can heal you. Second, all that energy that we are using to fight dealing with our past, let's turn that around and let's fight for our future. Make a choice to keep getting up, to keep pressing on, to go where you need to go to get the healing, to do what you need to do to get the healing. Recognize that you are worth fighting for. Jesus died for us. Yes. He died on the cross for us to be healed and restored. And so we are worth fighting for our life because Jesus died for us. Mm-hmm. He did not die for us just to sit there a mess and be a victim. The hardest thing is to recognize I have victim thinking and I need to fight against that victim thinking. And God created each of us with a specific purpose in mind. And the enemy doesn't want us healed, but God is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than we can ask or imagine. So we need to press in. We need to fight for ourselves. We need to put ourselves on our to-do list because we often don't do that. And not at the bottom, but at the top. And do the work that is necessary because there is a fullness that God has for us. There's a specific thing that we were created to do. And the things that have happened to us can distract us and shut us down from ever fulfilling them. And so you get that fighting spirit of, no, I'm going to fight in spite of what has happened. I'm going to live the life God created me for.
So good. But, one of the things that we talked about in the very beginning of the episode is that when you come from a trauma or abuse history, it can impact your ability to trust.
Absolutely.
So what if someone is listening right now and they don't even know how to begin trusting others or who is safe to trust? Can you talk to that for a second?
Absolutely. Because often, we don't have good relationships with our friends or family or very few friends. So I would say in that scenario, find a counselor or a psychologist. I would start with a professional because they're going to help you through on that journey. They have no emotional attachment, so you don't have to worry about what you're unpacking with them. Yeah. They're safe. We are trained to sit with people in their stuff and not to judge. And so that is going to be probably one of the best places to start is to find that professional. And then out of that, you will learn to trust and tell them, I have trust issues. Help me to trust. And they're going to help you take those steps to learn to trust and who are healthy people to trust in your life and who are not healthy people to trust, and begin to create those boundaries back in your life once again.
Such good advice. Friends, we're going to take a real quick commercial break, but when we come back, we will wrap up the show like we always do when I ask Kristin to share her hope-filled perspective with you. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where we've been talking today about healing from abuse and trauma and walking in the fullness of who God created you to be. I think it was so appropriate, Kristin, when you said, we are not our abuse. We are not our trauma. We are not our history. When God looks at us, that's not what he sees. I don't mean to say he doesn't recognize what we've been through. His heart breaks when we've gone through those experiences, but he doesn't look at us as broken. Kristin, what suggestion do you have for someone who has been the subject of abuse or trauma that they might begin to implement to make a positive change today?
Definitely, we find a safe person. I can't stress that enough. That is one of the things to implement, and is also recognizing it is okay to say my story. It is okay to talk about it, because that shame is so entwined with sexual abuse. We don't ever want to talk about it. We don't ever want to say anything. So I would say definitely we need to bring it to the light, and we need to invite God into our brokenness.
Yeah.
We need to invite him into our pain, invite him into our story, invite him into our brokenness. And as we do that, there is a transformation that begins to take place in us. It's the garden door is opened back up, or those hidden things, those memories that are inside of us. God's going to walk us through it. It's not like the treasure box gets opened up and all these memories come flying out at us at once. God is a very gentle God, and he helps us walk through that process. And so bringing our brokenness to Jesus and asking his help, even in the midst of us not trusting, even in the midst of me not knowing who I can trust. God, I'm asking for your help. That is so important. And then finding somebody trained that we talked about. Yeah. That's where we start, because then we can begin to take some steps, and knowing who are the trained people and who are not the trained people.
And it's okay if you try working with a professional and it's not a good fit.
Yes.
It's okay to try someone new.
Yeah.
There's no shame. I'm not the right mental health professional for everybody. Kristin is not the right mental health professional for everybody. Certain doctors are not going to be the right doctor. That's okay.
Yeah.
Don't allow yourself to feel shame if you go to a counselor and feel like this is not safe. They're not understanding. They're not trying to understand. Kristin, as we wrap up this episode, if a listener is wrestling with a history of trauma or abuse, what hope-filled perspective would you want to leave them with today?
Well, as I mentioned before, nothing or no one is beyond restoration with our Jesus. And that is something I shout from the mountaintop, because that is something I hear over and over, is that I'm too broken. I'm not worthy. I'm unlovable. I'm unwanted, and so much more. And that's all really fruit, unhealthy fruit, yes. But it's fruit from abuse. Yes. And so to know that with our Jesus, no one's beyond restoration. Right. There's nothing that is too difficult for our God. And he leads us to the right people. There's this whole balance that we need to find, that it is, yes, we go to God, but he also has gifted people with the ability to help us on our journey of healing. Absolutely. So surrendering to God, going to God, and trusting that he will bring the right people in our life. There is hope. There is hope to be healed. You mentioned that there is no one that is too broken for God to heal. And it reminds me of Psalm 34:18 that says, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. So friend, if you are feeling broken because of a history of abuse or trauma, you are in a perfect position
for God to draw near to you as you draw near to him. You know, we focus so much on today's episode about shame. I just want to remind you of the scripture that says, there is therefore now no condemnation or shame for those who are in Christ Jesus. If you are feeling shame, that is from the enemy of your soul. That is not from your Heavenly Father, who loves you, adores you. He adores you so much that he sings over you in his delight of you. Kristin, I thank you for using the pain of your past to minister to those in pain today. Friends, I'm going to put all the information about Kristin's book and her ministry and how you can connect with her on socials on the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. Kristin brought up a very important and staggering statistic, and that is that at least 1 in 4, possibly more, women have been the victim of abuse. So even if that's not you today, I guarantee that you know someone who has been the victim. So I would ask you to share this episode on social media, share it with your friends. You never know who you might be lending hope to this very day. Until we meet again, I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, with my guest, Kristin Clouse. Until we meet next week, may you have a hope-filled week.